One of the federal prosecutor's favorite tools is to prosecute people for fraud. And the federal fraud statutes are so broad that it covers just about any type of deceptive conduct, as long as there is some misrepresentation, which is a fancy word for lie, to induce someone to part with money or property, which is always going to be the point of any fraud. In the federal code, they have very few specific fraud statutes. For example, they have healthcare fraud, they have bank fraud, they have securities fraud. But the prosecutor's darlings are really the mail and wire fraud statutes. And they cover any type of fraud imaginable. As a matter of fact, the statute is worded to say that any scheme to defraud, where misrepresentation is made to induce one to part with money or property, is a fraud. Almost every single commercial business dispute in which one side claims the other made a false representation could conceivably be a mail fraud or a wire fraud. In the old days, under a mail fraud, you used to have to actually mail something for the federal government to have jurisdiction. And so a lot of fraudsters would make sure they didn't use the mails. But the statute has been broadened to cover commercial carriers such as UPS, FedEx, and just about every scheme to defraud is going to involve that. Or, if not that, it's going to involve wire fraud. Wire fraud is the same thing. Any scheme to defraud, to induce one to part with money or property. In the old days, the wire fraud used to be through the use of a telephone. Now, it's through the use of the internet in most cases. But it's hard to conduct any transaction without either using the internets, the mails, or some type of commercial carrier. And it's hard to conceive of any kind of dispute in which an alleged false statement is made to gain property or money. So conceivably, almost everything falls under the federal fraud statutes. As a recent example, the federal government was going after people for exporting cars to China. There's nothing illegal about that. And as a matter of fact, I question whether it's even illegal under the fraud statutes. But the government had a theory that somehow by doing that, false representations were made about where the vehicle was going, and that those false representations could cause the manufacturers to lose money. We will wait and see if the fraud statutes are construed in such a way as to cover that scenario.